He mocked the quiet janitor at his office for months, until the day the building lost power, and that same janitor opened a locked room no one knew existed. What they found inside changed everyone's opinion forever and left the CEO speechless. Marcus Thornton had a talent for making people feel small, and he wielded it like a weapon throughout his tenure as Senior Vice President of Operations at Meridian Financial. At 38, Marcus had climbed the corporate ladder through a combination of genuine competence and ruthless ambition, leaving a trail of bruised egos and broken spirits in his wake. His favorite target was Eduardo Santos, the night janitor who had worked at Meridian for over a decade. Eduardo was in his early 60s, spoke English with a heavy accent, and had the kind of quiet demeanor that Marcus interpreted as weakness. What Marcus didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Eduardo was hiding something extraordinary in the basement of their gleaming downtown office tower. The harassment started small, as these things often do. Marcus would make comments about Eduardo's English when others were around, speaking slowly and loudly as if Eduardo were deaf rather than bilingual. He'd leave deliberate messes for Eduardo to clean up, spill coffee on freshly mopped floors, and schedule late meetings in conference rooms he knew Eduardo would need to service. "Hey, Eduardo!" Marcus would call out whenever he saw the janitor in the hallways, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "Make sure you get all the corners in my office tonight. I know attention to detail isn't your strong suit." Eduardo would simply nod, continue with his work, and never respond to the provocations. His silence seemed to embolden Marcus, who began to escalate his behavior. During a company-wide meeting about budget cuts, Marcus made a point of suggesting they could save money by upgrading our cleaning staff to people who understand basic English and modern cleaning techniques. "I mean, how hard is it to operate a vacuum cleaner correctly?" Marcus had said, drawing uncomfortable laughter from some of his colleagues. "Maybe we need someone who didn't learn their skills in the Stone Age." Eduardo had been restocking supplies in the back of the conference room when Marcus made these comments. He'd paused for just a moment, his hands stilling on the paper towel dispenser, before continuing his work as if nothing had happened. Sarah Chen, one of the junior analysts, had tried to speak up. "Marcus, Eduardo does excellent work. The building is always spotless, and he's been here longer than most of us. Sarah, I appreciate your concern for employee relations," Marcus had replied condescendingly, "but facilities management falls under my purview. I think I know what standards we should expect from our support staff." This pattern continued for months. Marcus seemed to take genuine pleasure in publicly humiliating Eduardo, treating him as if he were invisible when it suited him, and singling him out for criticism when he wanted to demonstrate his authority. What Marcus and the rest of the Meridian staff didn't know was that Eduardo Santos held a PhD in electrical engineering from Universidad Nacional de Colombia and had spent 15 years designing power grid systems for major cities across South America before immigrating to the United States. They didn't know that Eduardo had taken the janitor position not because it was the only job he could find, but because it gave him access to something he needed: the basement mechanical rooms of a 40-story office tower with direct connections to the city's power grid. They didn't know that for the past 8 years, Eduardo had been working on something in the basement that would revolutionize how buildings managed energy consumption, a project that was now nearing completion. And they definitely didn't know that Eduardo had been documenting every slight, every insult, every moment of workplace harassment, while quietly revolutionizing the building's electrical systems from the ground up. The revelation came on a Tuesday morning in November, when a massive storm system moved through the city. High winds had knocked down power lines across 3 counties, and the downtown area was hit particularly hard. By 9 a.m., when most of Meridian's employees were arriving for work, the entire financial district was without power. The backup generators in most buildings were designed to maintain emergency lighting and critical systems for a few hours at most. Meridian's building was no exception, or so everyone thought. Marcus arrived at the office to find the lobby in chaos. The electronic keycard systems weren't working, the elevators were shut down, and emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow. The building's property manager was fielding angry calls from tenants while trying to coordinate with the power company. "How long until power is restored?" Marcus demanded, his voice echoing in the darkened lobby. "Could be hours, could be days," replied Janet Morrison, the building manager. "The whole grid is down. They're saying this is the worst power outage in the city's history." Marcus looked around at the dozens of Meridian employees gathering in the lobby, unable to access their offices on the upper floors. "This is unacceptable. We have client calls scheduled, trading deadlines to meet. We can't just shut down because the power is out." "Mr. Thornton, there's nothing we can do," Janet said. The backup generators are only designed to keep emergency systems running. We don't have power for elevators, computers, or normal office operations. That's when they heard it, the unmistakable hum of electrical equipment coming to life somewhere above them. The emergency lighting in the lobby suddenly brightened, shifting from the dim red glow to something approaching normal illumination. Then, impossibly, the elevator chimed and its doors opened. "What the hell?" Marcus muttered, staring at the functioning elevator in disbelief. Janet was checking her tablet, her face showing confusion and amazement. According to the building's monitoring systems, we're showing full power on floors 20 through 25. That's impossible. The main grid is completely down. Sarah Chen, who had been part of the crowd gathering in the lobby, stepped forward. "Isn't that where our offices are? Floors 22 through 24? Before anyone could respond, Eduardo appeared from a stairwell door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." He was carrying a tablet and wearing a tool belt, looking more purposeful and confident than anyone had ever seen him. "Building has power," Eduardo announced to the gathered crowd. "Floors 20 through 25 fully operational. Elevators running, computers working, all systems normal." Marcus stared at Eduardo in disbelief. "What are you talking about? The whole city is without power." "City power is down, yes," Eduardo replied calmly. "Building power is not. I have made modifications." "Modifications?" Janet stepped forward, her property manager instincts kicking in. "What kind of modifications? You're not authorized to make electrical modifications to this building." Eduardo pulled out his tablet and showed her a screen full of technical diagrams and real-time monitoring data. "I have been upgrading building systems for 8 years. Building now has independent power generation, storage, and distribution. Can operate for 30 days without city power." The crowd in the lobby fell silent as they processed what Eduardo was saying. Marcus felt the familiar surge of anger that came whenever someone challenged his authority. "Eduardo, you're a janitor," Marcus said loudly, his voice carrying the same condescending tone he'd used for months. "You clean floors and empty trash cans. You don't modify electrical systems. You probably don't even understand what any of those screens mean." Eduardo looked at Marcus for a long moment, and for the first time, he didn't remain silent. "Mr. Thornton, would you like to see what I have built?" There was something in Eduardo's tone, calm, confident, almost amused, that made Marcus pause. But his ego wouldn't let him back down in front of the entire office. "Sure, Eduardo. Show us what you think you've accomplished with your modifications." Eduardo nodded and walked toward the elevator. "Please follow me. But first, I must explain something." He turned to address the entire crowd gathered in the lobby. "My name is Dr. Eduardo Santos. I have PhD in electrical engineering from Universidad Nacional de Colombia. Before coming to United States, I designed power grid systems for Bogotá, Medellín, and Caracas. I have 43 patents in energy storage and distribution technologies." The silence in the lobby was deafening. Marcus felt his face flush as he realized where this was heading. "I took position as janitor because I needed access to buildings' electrical infrastructure. I wanted to test new technologies in real-world environment. For 8 years, I have been designing and building most advanced building energy system in North America." Eduardo gestured toward the elevator. "Today, while entire city has no power, this building operates normally because of systems I have created. Would you like to see?" The ride to the basement was the longest elevator trip of Marcus's life. The usual corporate hierarchy had been completely inverted. Eduardo was now clearly in charge, leading a group of executives and managers who had spent months treating him as if he were invisible. When the elevator doors opened on the basement level, Marcus expected to see the usual mechanical rooms filled with aging HVAC equipment and water heaters. Instead, he found himself looking at something that belonged in a science fiction movie. The basement had been completely transformed into a high-tech command center. Banks of servers lined the walls, their LED indicators blinking in complex patterns. Massive battery arrays filled one entire room, connected to sophisticated power management systems that hummed quietly with electrical energy. Advanced monitoring equipment tracked everything from power consumption to air quality to structural stress on the building's framework. But the centerpiece of Eduardo's creation was something even more impressive, a series of revolutionary energy generation units that appeared to be producing electricity from sources Marcus couldn't identify. "This is a zero-point energy harvesting system," Eduardo explained, leading the group through his underground laboratory. "It captures ambient electromagnetic radiation and converts it to usable power. Combined with advanced battery storage and smart distribution algorithms, it makes building completely energy independent." Sarah Chen, whose background was in financial analysis, was the first to grasp the implications. Eduardo, do you realize what this means? If this technology works the way you're describing, it would revolutionize the entire energy industry. Technology works, Eduardo replied simply. Today is proof. While city struggles with power outage, this building operates normally. Air conditioning, elevators, computers, lights, everything functions because building generates its own power. Janet Morrison was examining the monitoring systems with growing amazement. According to these readings, the building is not only generating enough power for its own needs, but it's producing excess energy. You're actually feeding power back into the grid. During normal operations, yes, Eduardo confirmed. Building produces 30% more energy than it consumes. Excess power goes to city grid. Today, with grid down, all power is available for building use. Marcus stood in the middle of Eduardo's laboratory, trying to process what he was seeing. This was the same man he had mocked for months, treating him as if he were barely capable of pushing a mop. The same man he had insulted in meetings, dismissed as incompetent, and subjected to constant workplace harassment. "How is this possible?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eduardo turned to face him directly. "You want to know how is possible? I show you." He led the group to a wall covered with photographs, documents, and certificates. Marcus found himself looking at Eduardo's diploma from one of South America's most prestigious universities, patent documents for dozens of innovative technologies, and photos of Eduardo standing next to massive infrastructure projects. "I designed power grid for city of 2 million people," Eduardo said, pointing to a photograph of himself in a hard hat standing next to enormous electrical transformers. "I created backup power systems for hospitals and emergency services. I hold patents on energy storage technologies used around the world." He gestured toward another wall covered with detailed technical drawings and computer simulations. "When I came to United States, my foreign credentials were not recognized. To get job in my field, I would need to repeat many years of education and certification. I had family to support, bills to pay, so I took job that was available." Eduardo pulled out a thick folder filled with detailed plans and calculations. "But I never stopped being engineer. Every night after cleaning building, I would study electrical systems. I would design improvements, test new technologies, build prototypes." He opened the folder to reveal hundreds of pages of technical documentation, all meticulously handwritten and illustrated. "For 8 years, I have been upgrading this building piece by piece, always with proper permits, always meeting all safety codes. Building management approved all work, though they did not understand full scope of project." Marcus looked at Janet Morrison, who nodded reluctantly. "He's right. Eduardo has been filing proper paperwork for electrical modifications for years. I assumed it was just routine maintenance and equipment upgrades. I had no idea he was building this." Eduardo continued his explanation as he led them through different sections of his underground installation. "I designed system to be invisible, integrated with existing infrastructure. From outside, building appears normal, but every electrical circuit has been optimized. Every power consumption point has been analyzed and improved." The scope of Eduardo's work was staggering. He had essentially rebuilt the building's entire electrical infrastructure from the ground up, creating a self-sufficient power ecosystem that was years ahead of anything in commercial use. "The most difficult part," Eduardo said as they toured the battery storage facility, "was not the engineering. The most difficult part was working while being treated as if I was invisible, as if I was too stupid to understand basic concepts." He looked directly at Marcus. "Every day, I would listen to comments about my intelligence, my education, my abilities. I would clean offices while people discussed me as if I was not human being with feelings and dignity." Marcus felt his face burning with shame as Eduardo continued. "I documented everything, every insult, every moment of disrespect, every assumption that I was incompetent because I spoke with accent or worked as janitor." Eduardo pulled out another tablet, this one containing video files and audio recordings. "I have record of every time someone treated me as less than human being." The silence in the underground laboratory was heavy with the weight of recognition. Everyone present had witnessed Marcus's treatment of Eduardo, and many had done nothing to stop it. "But I also understand something that maybe you do not," Eduardo continued. "People judge based on what they see on surface. They see janitor with accent. They assume lack of education or intelligence. They do not see PhD. They do not see years of experience. They do not see capability to create something like this." He gestured around the sophisticated laboratory that surrounded them. "I built this not to prove anything to anyone. I built it because it needed to be built. Energy independence is future of all buildings, all cities. Someone must develop technology, someone must test it in real conditions. Sarah Chen stepped forward. Eduardo, this technology, have you considered commercializing it? The applications are incredible. I have been approached by energy companies, Eduardo replied. Word spreads in engineering community about work being done here. But I have condition for any licensing or partnership arrangements. He looked around the group, his gaze settling on Marcus. I require written apology from every person who participated in harassment or discrimination. Not because I need validation, but because next engineer who takes job cleaning floors deserves to be treated with dignity. Marcus felt the weight of Eduardo's words settle on his shoulders. He thought about all the times he had dismissed Eduardo, all the cruel comments, all the moments when he had treated another human being as if they were beneath his notice. Eduardo, Marcus said, his voice hoarse with emotion. I don't know what to say. You can start with truth, Eduardo replied simply. Do you understand now that person's value is not determined by their job title or accent or appearance? The question hung in the air as Marcus struggled with the magnitude of his mistakes. This man he had treated as incompetent had been quietly revolutionizing the building around them. While Marcus had been focused on office politics and corporate climbing, Eduardo had been solving real problems and creating genuine value. I understand, Marcus said quietly, and I'm sorry. I'm deeply, profoundly sorry for how I treated you. Eduardo nodded. Apology is first step, but more important is change in behavior, change in assumptions about people who are different from you. Over the next several hours, as power remained out throughout the city, Meridian Financial operated normally thanks to Eduardo's innovations. Client calls were completed on schedule, trading operations continued without interruption, and the building became a refuge for other businesses affected by the outage. Word of Eduardo's achievement spread quickly through the corporate world and the engineering community. By the end of the week, he had received offers from major energy companies, universities, and research institutions. The CEO of Meridian Financial, Robert Hayes, called an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. He had been out of town during the power outage and was struggling to understand how his company's building had become the center of a technological revolution. Let me get this straight, Hayes said, looking around the conference room at his senior staff. Our janitor is actually a world-class engineer who has spent 8 years secretly turning our building into an energy-independent facility. That's correct, Sarah Chen replied. She had become Eduardo's unofficial liaison with the executive team. Dr. Santos has created technology that could revolutionize how buildings consume and generate power. Hayes shook his head in amazement. And we've been treating him like a janitor. Worse than that, Sarah said, glancing at Marcus. Some of us treated him like he was barely capable of performing basic tasks. Marcus had been dreading this conversation, but he knew he had to take responsibility for his actions. Mr. Hayes, I owe both you and Dr. Santos an explanation and an apology. For months, I engaged in workplace harassment based on nothing but my own prejudices and assumptions. He detailed his treatment of Eduardo, from the small daily humiliations to the public comments in meetings. Hayes's expression grew darker with each revelation. Marcus, this is exactly the kind of behavior that creates hostile work environments and exposes the company to legal liability. But more than that, it's just wrong. I know, Marcus replied. I've already apologized to Dr. Santos personally, but I know that's not enough. I'm prepared to face whatever consequences are appropriate. Hayes turned to Sarah. What does Dr. Santos want from us? What would make this right? He's asked for written apologies from everyone who participated in or witnessed harassment without intervening. He also wants to establish a program to ensure that all employees, regardless of their role, are treated with respect and dignity. Done, Hayes said immediately. What else? He wants the company to commit to hiring practices that recognize skills and experience regardless of how they were obtained or where they were obtained. He's particularly concerned about immigrants whose credentials aren't recognized in the United States. Hayes nodded. We can do that. Anything else? Sarah smiled. He wants to continue working here, but as Director of Building Operations and Energy Innovation, not as a janitor. He says he likes the building and wants to continue developing his technologies here. The transformation of Eduardo's role at Meridian Financial became a model for how companies could recognize and utilize hidden talent within their workforce. His story was featured in business journals and engineering publications as an example of how prejudice and assumptions could blind organizations to extraordinary capabilities. Marcus, meanwhile, faced the consequences of his behavior. He was formally reprimanded, required to attend sensitivity training, and had his bonus structure modified to include metrics related to employee relations and workplace culture. More importantly, he began the difficult work of examining his own biases and changing how he interacted with people. The building itself became a showcase for Eduardo's energy innovations. Tours were scheduled for engineers, business leaders, and government officials interested in learning about energy independence and sustainable building operations. The technology Eduardo had developed was licensed to energy companies around the world, generating substantial revenue for both him and Meridian Financial. But perhaps the most significant change was in the culture of the office itself. Eduardo's story became a powerful reminder that every person in the organization, regardless of their title or background, deserved to be treated with respect and dignity. 6 months after the power outage that had revealed Eduardo's secret laboratory, Marcus found himself working late one evening when he encountered Eduardo in the hallway. Instead of the cleaning supplies and quiet demeanor that had characterized their previous interactions, Eduardo was carrying technical drawings and discussing building modifications with a team of engineers. "Dr. Santos," Marcus said, stopping to acknowledge him properly. "How is the new project coming along?" Eduardo smiled. "Very well, Mr. Thornton. We are installing similar systems in 3 more buildings downtown. Technology is proving very successful." "That's wonderful. I'm glad to see you getting the recognition you deserve." Eduardo paused for a moment, studying Marcus's face. "You know, I think maybe something good came from difficult situation. Not just for me, but for everyone. Sometimes people need to see consequences of their actions before they can change." Marcus nodded. "I've learned a lot about myself over the past few months. Most of it wasn't pleasant to discover." "Learning is good," Eduardo replied. "Growing is better. But most important is treating other people with dignity, regardless of who you think they are or what you think they can do." As Eduardo walked away, surrounded by his team of engineers and technical staff, Marcus reflected on how completely his understanding of the world had been transformed. He had learned that intelligence and capability could be hidden behind accents and job titles, that assumptions based on appearance could be catastrophically wrong, and that treating people with disrespect wasn't just morally wrong, it was strategically stupid. The quiet janitor he had mocked for months had been capable of feats of engineering that Marcus couldn't even comprehend. While Marcus had been focused on office politics and corporate maneuvering, Eduardo had been solving real problems and creating genuine value. The locked room Eduardo had opened that day hadn't just contained advanced technology, it had contained a lesson about human dignity, hidden potential, and the cost of prejudice that Marcus would carry with him for the rest of his career. And in the end, the CEO's speechlessness hadn't come from amazement at Eduardo's technical achievements, impressive as they were. It had come from the realization that their company had been harboring genius while treating it as if it were incompetence, and that they had almost lost something extraordinary because they had been too blind to see what was right in front of them. The building's power had been restored that day, but more importantly, so had a sense of respect for the hidden capabilities and dignity of every person who walked its halls.